Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness, whispers, and terror await you. Are you ready to confront your fears? Story 1: The Silent Passenger. Lila loved her solitary late-night drives. The quiet hum of her car and the winding country roads brought her a strange sense of peace. One stormy Friday night, she was heading home from her office. The rain pounding against her windshield, blurring the world outside. Her GPS inexplicably glitching, insisted on rerouting her through an unfamiliar backroad. Against her better judgment, she complied, reasoning it would save her time. As she turned onto the desolate road, the air inside her car grew heavy. The radio, playing softly in the background, crackled before cutting off completely. Suddenly, a soft whisper filled the car. Faint but unmistakable, "You shouldn't have come this way." Lila slammed on the brakes, her heart racing. She scanned the empty back seat through her rearview mirror. But there was no one there. Convinced she was just tired, she shook it off and kept driving. But the whisper returned. Louder this time. "Turn back." Barely a mile later, her headlights illuminated a figure standing on the roadside, a woman soaked to the bone, clutching a bundle wrapped in tattered cloth. Despite the warning, Lila slowed down and rolled down her window. "Are you okay?" she asked. The woman didn't respond. Her head hung low. Against her instincts, Lila unlocked the passenger door. "Get in. I'll take you somewhere safe," Lila offered. The woman climbed in without a word, bringing with her an overwhelming chill. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic. Lila tried to strike up a conversation, but her passenger remained silent, her face hidden beneath wet, stringy hair. After a few minutes, Lila glanced at the bundle the woman was clutching. It shifted slightly. "What's in there?" Lila asked hesitantly. The woman finally turned to her, revealing hollow eyes and a sickly grin. "A gift for you," she whispered. Panicked, Lila slammed on the brakes. When she turned to confront the woman, the passenger seat was empty. The door hadn't opened, there were no signs of her ever being there. Only the damp imprint of her presence remained on the seat. Desperate to leave the cursed road, Lila sped off. But the GPS refused to reroute. It only displayed 2 words: "Keep going." The farther she drove, the more the road seemed to twist unnaturally. Trees loomed closer, their gnarled branches clawing at her car. Her phone was dead, and the rain had turned into a torrential downpour. She couldn't see anything beyond her headlights. Then, a child's voice echoed through the car, "You can't escape her." The road ended abruptly, forcing her to stop in front of a dilapidated house. Its windows were dark, and its door hung ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Against all logic, Lila felt compelled to enter. The interior was suffocatingly dark, save for a faint, flickering light at the end of the hall. As she moved closer, she realized it was coming from an old lantern hanging in a room filled with decaying furniture and damp wallpaper. In the center of the room stood a crib. The bundle from earlier lay inside it, writhing. Against her better judgment, Lila approached the crib. As she pulled back the cloth, she froze. Inside was a decayed, skeletal baby, its hollow eye sockets staring straight at her. The lantern's light dimmed, and the whisper returned. "You took her place. Now she'll take yours." Lila bolted from the house. But the world outside had changed. Her car was gone. replaced by endless rows of tombstones. The rain had stopped. But the air was thick with the sound of whispers, hundreds of them. Circling her. Closing in. She ran blindly through the cemetery until she stumbled upon her own car. Its headlights piercing the darkness. She jumped in and started the engine. The GPS, now functional, displayed one word: home. Relieved. She drove as fast as she could, refusing to look in the rearview mirror. But the whispers persisted. Louder now, accompanied by the faint sound of laughter. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the house was dark. Her husband should have been home. But the silence was suffocating. As she stepped inside, her phone buzzed to life. A single notification lit up the screen, a photo of her in the driver's seat. The hollow-eyed woman sitting beside her, grinning. Lila was never seen again. Weeks later, a local reported seeing a woman standing on the same back road, holding a bundle and wearing a sickly grin. When a kind stranger stopped to help her, she climbed into their car without a word. And so, the cycle continued. Story 2, The Vanishing Tides. Evelyn had always loved the sea. For as long as she could remember. Its rhythmic whispers lulled her to sleep, and its salty breeze awakened her imagination. After inheriting a quaint, weathered beach house from her estranged grandmother, she saw it as an escape from her monotonous city life. The house stood perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, its isolation both comforting and eerie. Locals whispered about the house. They called it the Widow's Watch, not for the usual tragic tales of sailors lost at sea, but for something darker. Evelyn dismissed the warnings as small-town superstition. She was here for a fresh start, to reconnect with her late grandmother's legacy, and to uncover why she'd never been invited here before. But some whispers should never be ignored. On her first night, Evelyn explored the house, her footsteps echoing on the warped wooden floors. The air inside smelled faintly of salt and decay. Among her grandmother's possessions, she found a weathered journal. Its pages were filled with cryptic entries, recounting strange occurrences. The tide speaks at night, one entry read. Do not listen. Do not answer. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliff. As midnight approached, Evelyn heard something unusual, not just the sound of water, but voices. They were faint, like murmurs carried on the wind. She pressed her ear to the cold glass of the window, straining to understand. Come back. Evelyn. Her name. The realization sent a chill down her spine. She stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. She convinced herself it was exhaustion or the wind playing tricks. Yet, when she glanced back at the window, she thought she saw a shape moving in the shadows below, something too large to be human. Determined to uncover the truth, Evelyn delved deeper into her grandmother's journal the next morning. One entry stood out, dated decades ago. The tide took him. They promised they would bring him back. But it was a lie. Now, they want more. I can hear them calling. Evelyn's grandmother had been a widow, but the details of her husband's disappearance were vague. The journal hinted at something unnatural, something lurking beneath the waves. Later, while walking along the rocky beach, Evelyn discovered an old, rusted bell buried in the sand. A shiver ran through her as she touched it. The air around her seemed to hum. A fisherman nearby noticed her find and approached cautiously. You shouldn't be here, he warned, his voice trembling. That bell calls them. They only come for the lonely, the grieving. That's how they get in. Who are they? Evelyn asked. But the man simply shook his head and walked away, muttering a prayer. That night, Evelyn stayed up, determined to capture the voices she'd heard. She set up a recording device near the window and waited. At exactly midnight, the voices returned. They were clearer this time, almost melodic. Evelyn, come closer, we can give him back. She froze. Her father had disappeared at sea when she was a child. The memory was buried deep, but now it surfaced like a ghost. Could these voices know? Were they offering her the impossible? Drawn by a force she couldn't explain, Evelyn descended the cliffside path to the shore. The moonlight illuminated the waves. And there, at the water's edge, stood a figure. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its body shimmering like a mirage. Its face was obscured, but its voice was clear. Do you want to see him again? Evelyn's voice shook as she asked. What do you want in return? The figure's head tilted, and its voice turned cold. Only a promise. When the tide calls, you will answer. Evelyn knew she should run, but the thought of her father consumed her. Bring him back, she whispered, barely able to speak the words. The figure stretched out a hand, its fingers impossibly long. The air grew thick with a smell of brine and rot. As Evelyn reached out, the figure dissolved into mist, and the waves surged forward. The next morning, Evelyn woke on the beach, her clothes soaked. She could barely remember returning to the house. But one thing was clear, she wasn't alone anymore. Footprints, wet and heavy, led from the shore to her front door. Inside, her father was waiting. He looked exactly as she remembered, but his eyes were empty, his movements stiff. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice was hollow, like an echo. Evelyn's joy quickly turned to dread. The journal's final entry haunted her, they don't give without taking. When the tide calls, you can't refuse. The voices returned every night, louder and more insistent. Evelyn tried to ignore them, but her father grew restless. He would stand by the window, staring at the waves, muttering in that hollow voice. Then the tide called for her. One night, Evelyn woke to the sound of the bell she'd found, its eerie chime resonating through the house. Her father stood at the door, his face pale and unnatural. It's time, he said, his voice no longer his own. The tide surged unnaturally high, crashing against the cliffs with a deafening roar. Evelyn was drawn outside, her legs moving as if guided by an unseen force. The figure from before emerged from the waves, flanked by others just like it. You made a promise, it whispered. Evelyn screamed as the tide engulfed her, dragging her into its icy embrace. The last thing she saw was her father watching from the shore, his expression unreadable. The beach house stands empty now, but locals swear they still hear Evelyn's screams on stormy nights. Some say she walks the cliffs, her voice mingling with the whispers of the tide, calling for the next soul to answer. But no one dares to listen. Story 3, The Wailing House. Jessica sat alone in her cramped studio apartment, scrolling absent-mindedly through her email. Most of it was spam or dull work-related messages. But one subject line caught her eye: you are invited to the Wailing House. The message was brief. We've selected you for an exclusive experience at the Wailing House, a historic manor with a dark past. All expenses covered. Arrive on October 31st, midnight. Transportation will be provided. She stared at the screen, her heart racing. Jessica had never heard of the Wailing house. But the idea intrigued her. As a freelance journalist, she specialized in urban legends and paranormal phenomena. This could be her big break. A quick search yielded sparse information, rumors of missing guests, unexplained deaths, and whispers of a ghostly presence. Against her better judgment, she replied with a simple yes. The black car that picked her up was eerily silent, with tinted windows that obscured the outside world. After hours of driving through desolate countryside, the vehicle stopped abruptly. The driver motioned for her to step out. The Wailing house loomed before her, a decrepit Victorian mansion shrouded in mist. Its windows were dark voids, and the front door stood slightly ajar as if inviting her in. Jessica hesitated, clutching her bag. A gust of wind carried a faint, sorrowful wail, sending chills down her spine. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice echoed back, unanswered. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of decay. The grand chandelier in the foyer flickered weakly, casting shadows that danced on the peeling wallpaper. A single envelope lay on the hall table, addressed to her in spidery handwriting. "Welcome, Jessica. The house is yours for the night. Explore freely. Listen carefully." The cryptic note made her skin crawl. She ventured deeper, flashlight in hand. The further she explored, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls seemed to groan with age, and faint whispers tickled her ears, though no one else was there. In the parlor, she found a photograph of the original occupants, a family of 5. Their faces were solemn, their eyes haunting. The youngest child, a girl, seemed to stare directly at her, even from the aged frame. A sudden noise broke her concentration, a soft thudding upstairs. Her journalistic instincts urged her to investigate. The master bedroom was untouched by time, its 4-poster bed draped in dusty velvet. On the dresser was a diary, its leather cover brittle with age. Jessica flipped it open, the pages revealing the frantic scrawls of a woman named Lillian. "He comes at night. The wails grow louder. He wants us all." The room turned icy. The door slammed shut behind her. The wailing began as a low hum, growing into a bone-chilling cry. Jessica's breath hitched as the sound seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She bolted into the hallway. But the house had transformed. The staircase now spiraled endlessly downward, and the wallpaper bled with dark stains. Shadows moved unnaturally, coalescing into a tall, faceless figure cloaked in black. Jessica stumbled backward, her flashlight flickering. The entity raised a hand, and the wailing intensified, reverberating through her skull. She screamed, "What do you want?" The figure pointed toward the parlor. Trembling, she obeyed. The photograph was different now. The family was gone, replaced by her own face, distorted in terror. She turned, and the entity loomed over her. Desperate to escape, Jessica ran. Every door led her back to the same room, the same photograph, now showing her sprawled lifeless on the floor. The whispers grew deafening, "Stay with us. Stay forever." With a final burst of courage, she smashed a window with a chair. The shards of glass cut her arms as she climbed through. But the cold night air greeted her like salvation. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsing in a field. When she woke, it was daylight. The Wailing house was gone, replaced by an empty lot. Jessica thought she was free, until she opened her phone. The photograph of the faceless family was her new wallpaper. And beneath it was a text. "You can never leave." Jessica's story became an urban legend. Some say she vanished shortly after that night. Others claim the Wailing house chooses its victims, luring them with promises of discovery and fame. If you ever receive an invitation to the Wailing house, remember, some mysteries are best left unsolved.